Folks, hello and welcome to another episode of RfRx. My name is Eric Wells, and just like every week, this is going to be a fantastic RfRx episode. With me is a familiar face to all of you, or most of you who've attended in the past. We have Kara Griffin, and she is a helpline agent with RfR. Kara, how are you doing?
I am well. I am glad to be here. Also celebrating fall and, my favorite day of the week, Monday, RfRx Day.
Oh, perfect. I like how you snuck that in. I love it. Well, folks, like every week, we have a poll, and this week is no different. I'm going to go ahead and launch it, and this poll will be running while we are doing a little introduction, and we'll kind of wrap it up as we start to do the guest bio. But it's got 4 questions. When was the last time you recognized you were wrong about something? And several answers: never, or today, within last week, last month, last year, or over a year ago, or when am I ever right about anything? So you've got those options to choose from. Question number 2, when do feelings point us in the right direction of being right or correct in a sense? I'm not sure, always, sometimes, never. What the heck are feelings? Question number 3. You can tell if you're standing for the right thing by noting who is standing against you. Is that statement true? Is it false? Does it depend? Or I'm not really sure. Question number 4, the last question we've got here. Absolutism is a helpful structure for knowledge, ethics, social politics, or parenting. We did have the choice to put I'm not sure, but we kind of want you to put your money down as to what answer you think it is. So like I said, that poll is going to be going for a bit, and we may pull it up to kind of review the results. All right, moving on. Kara, why don't you tell us what RfRx is? Start us off.
So it's the best event of the week. It happens on Monday nights. And, depending on where you live, actually, in some places it's not Monday night right now. Sorry about that. But it is a series of weekly online sessions where we get together and have a guest to come and discuss topics that might be relevant to folks in RfR. And of course, as always, this is not a replacement for our online community or our support groups or anything like that, but it is meant to be a complement to those communities and to provide some good advice and coping skills for the types of things that might be going on with some people in their lives. And so we have a super exciting session tonight that I'm really excited for with a returning guest. And if anybody has ideas for future topics they'd like to learn more about or hear more about, or questions or anything like that, they can email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. Be glad to receive those. That's also where we receive our death threats too, if you have any of those. Just in case. And also you can find all of our previous RfRx recordings on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. So Eric, why don't you tell us about RfR?
No.
Well, all right, then don't.
All right, I will. Recovering from Religion. You've heard us say RfR for a bit, and that stands for Recovering from Religion. Recovering from Religion is a nonprofit organization totally ran by volunteers. So you see all of us here, none of us are getting paid to do this. We're just kind of doing it out of the passion of our own hearts, and kind of maybe we are being selfish, because I know I am. I'm getting a lot out of this, learning a lot. But regardless, Recovering from Religion, we've got a mission statement, and it's to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And we've got a ton of different programs to accomplish that mission, to pursue that mission. And so we're going to describe a few of them for you. Kara, how do we offer the healing part?
Well, I mean, I'm tempted to say no, but I won't. No, I love that part. That's what we do with our helpline primarily. And that is where you can call or chat in anytime, 24/7, to speak with an agent who's standing by to take your call, but not sell you anything and not proselytize you. They're there to just listen with an empathetic ear, no judgment, no criticism, but they're all trained, well trained, and they're there to just be an empathetic ear and help talk through whatever issue may be going on. And so that support you can receive from peer support 24/7. Just go to recoveringfromreligion.org and you can see the phone number and the opportunity to chat in, whichever one you prefer. And you can also find access on our website to our resources page. If you would prefer to browse through those on your own, there's a whole lot of information there at recoveringfromreligion.org/resources. So feel free to check that out as well. Next, we also offer hope through sharing and listening to personal stories. And the idea behind that is basically just that we're all in this together, and some people may have been through a certain experience or have a certain perspective on something that happened in their life that they're able to share, and it may provide some kind of hope or inspiration to others of us. And we can recognize, oh, okay, if they got through that, that's actually, that makes me feel more supported or, inspired or whatever the case may be. So there's some really great inspiring stories from people that you can find as well on our blog or our podcast. And those can be found at medium.com/excommunications. That's our blog. And then the podcast is recoveringfromreligion.org/podcast. And Eric's putting all those in the chat.
I got the links in the chat. And the podcast, we have a lot of backlog, about a year's worth of podcasts where it started out. And now we've started to put the RfRxs into the podcast feed as well. So if you're not wanting to see them on YouTube or you miss something and you'd like to kind of drive around and listen to them, we've got them in the podcast form. Now we're catching up. We're not quite there yet because we have done, I think this is number 78 RfRx. This is RfRx number 78, I think, which is crazy. And so they're dropping RfRxs in the podcast feed every day, and they've done for about 2 months, so they're still kind of catching up. Anyways, just kind of wanted to give that update.
Great point. And why don't you tell us about your favorite support?
Yep, I sure will do that because I love the support groups. Folks, when I started volunteering for Recovering from Religion, I was a support group leader. I wasn't a support group director like I am now. Been a support group leader for about 5 years, and that was just a fantastic experience. Support groups are face-to-face meetings. They used to be in person, but now due to the pandemic, we're doing them virtually. And once we get through the pandemic, we're going to be doing a mixture of both in-person and virtual meetings. But this is really where the long-term healing occurs. You heard Kara talk about the helpline, and to me that was kind of like an emergency use, like I'm going through a crisis right now, or I really need a resource right now, and it's like an emergency room type of thing. The support groups is kind of like your doctor's office, like, hey, let's check up what's been going on with me. This thing has been bugging me for the last month. Let's talk about it and let's kind of see what we can do about it. Right now, we have 64 groups around the world, including 2 dedicated virtual chapters. A regular virtual chapter is sort of like a catch-all bucket to accommodate folks in Europe where we don't have a whole lot of support groups at this time, or Africa, or the Asian continent. But we also have a women's only chapter, a virtual chapter as well. And that's to accommodate women, whoever identifies as a woman all over the world can join and talk about specifically what's going on. And they may not feel comfortable sharing things they may not feel comfortable sharing in a regular mixed gender support group. So those are the support groups. They're fantastic, and I am a better person coming out of those support groups, I gotta tell you, because I was really kind of screwed up coming out of religion. In addition to that,
we all.
In addition to that, we talked about the helpline, like I said, and we talked about support groups, and that's both peer support. You're not going to find professional help in there. Like, you won't get diagnosed with anything, or there won't be given very specific advice. None of the volunteers are trained to that kind of level as a mental health professional is. But like I've said in the past, there are some times where we need more than what peer support can offer. And so we have created and set up the Secular Therapy Project. And this is where we have a team of certified therapists to vet other therapists to ensure that they have their proper licensing in the state or country, to ensure that they run a secular practice, and also ensure to run an evidence-based treatment. And so it's basically a directory where I, as a client seeking a secular therapist, can go and create an account and hopefully find a secular therapist near me who has been vetted through this process, pretty darn cool process that they do. Now, as you might imagine, this pandemic has caused a lot of people to seek mental health, and so many therapists are just booked solid because of it. So if you know of a secular therapist, please encourage them to submit an application to go through the process to get into the directory, because we would love to have more people, because there's a lot of people out there that need some help. And you can connect with a therapist and set up an account at seculartherapy.org. All right. In addition to that, we have an online community, the Recovering from Religion online community. And this is this covers the need of where if you want to talk to folks, like-minded folks who are kind of struggling with some of the same issues, whether you're an ex-Mormon or an ex-Muslim, or finding out you're a secular parent all of a sudden, or you were in the military or are in the military and kind of struggling with some issues that are stemming from religion and being in the military, we've got the online community to connect you with folks who have been through similar experiences and can understand those types of challenges that someone like me, who is not a parent or has never been in the military, who doesn't identify as an LGBTQ individual, can go through. So, or can fully understand, or haven't been in those shoes. So this is not publicly accessible. You have to go through the helpline, whether you make a call or chat in, and they'll ask you a few questions to see if you're a good fit, and then send you a Slack invite to join the Recovering from Religion online community. It's a fantastic place, and a lot of great work and great relationships can be forged inside of the online community. Now, if you're kind of out and about and looking for even more people to connect with, and no longer are a believer and want to meet some fantastic people, I would highly recommend you check out the atheist community of Discord. It's a fantastic group of people here. We've got in the atheist community of Discord, and here in the program, in the audience, we've got a lot of people who are part of the atheist community Discord. And so check that out. I'm going to drop the invite link into the chat, and you can click it and join the atheist community Discord. Kara, I've been talking for a while. My mouth is kind of dry. I need some water. Why don't you take over for the next couple of sections?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take over for the next couple of sessions too, I guess, if you want. It might not be quite the same without you, but I'll do my best. No, please hydrate. Yes, so I'll talk a little bit about volunteering, which is another way that healing can take place. In fact, helping others can be a great way to find healing as well as meaning and purpose. That's certainly been the case for a lot of the other RfR volunteers, including myself, especially during all this time with the pandemic, when, there aren't a lot of those same connections that you're able to make that you normally are. And volunteering for RfR has been a great way for me and many of the other volunteers to find that. And we are always in need of volunteers for all of the different parts of the programs that we mentioned already, whether it's a support group, or if you think you might make a good helpline agent, or if you're a licensed therapist and you want to sign up for the Secular Therapy Project, or any of these things. We're always looking for people, but we have plenty of other positions available. If you have a skill that you can offer, we probably have a place for you, whether it's tech skills, or we have some amazing troll smashers that come every week. Shout out to y'all. Yes, thank you. There's a job for everybody. If you are ready to help and think you might be a good fit for the organization, then check us out at recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer, and you can read about what it takes to become a volunteer and how that process goes, and sign up if you would like to. So definitely check that out. And then let's actually get started with the meeting tonight. I've been talking for a while too. So what we do every Monday is the same thing we do every Monday, is not try to take over the world, but actually have a discussion with our fantastic guest. And we do that for about an hour. And then afterwards, we have a short Q&A session, maybe about 20 minutes. And so during the talk, if you have any questions that you would like our speaker to address, feel free to type those into the chat at any time, and we'll be collecting those from our chat as well as from the ACD Discord server, so that we can ask those at the end and get those addressed. And then afterwards, we'll have some closing thoughts from the fabulous Gayle Jordan. And then following that, we'll have some people's very most favorite part of the show, which is the hangout, which is where actually we turn off the recording and it's just us here in person, or well, virtually in person, hanging out and just discussing and talking about whatever things came up, whatever is interesting or salient at the moment. And that can go on for quite some time. So we'll have our social hangout hosts moderating that afterwards. So definitely stick around after the meeting, the show, if you would like to stay for that. And that's about it. Are you ready to go, Eric?
Let's do this. We've been talking long enough. Allow me, folks, to introduce you to this fantastic guest we have. He's been here 3 other times, which means that this is the 4th time he's been a guest here at RfRx. As an educator and a trainer for health professionals and other professionals, David Teachout also has a private practice helping adults and couples with learning resiliency skills related to relationship difficulties and trauma. He maintains a podcast, which I'd encourage you to check out, called Humanity's Values, and a blog related to mental health topics. David has worked in mental health care for 15 years, and he holds a master's in both forensic and counseling psychology. I'm going to have to ask him what forensic psychology is in a minute, as well as currently working towards a PsyD, a PsyD in clinical psychology. Boy, I'm on par tonight. He also works in community mental health, social work, criminal justice, elder care, and child advocacy. David, welcome once again to the show. I'm so glad you're here this evening.
Thank you.
David, what is, real quick, what is forensic psychology?
So forensic psychology is the intersection of law and psychology. So most people know it from shows like, originally X-Files, but now like NCIS and others. Unfortunately, we do not gallivant around the country on private Cessnas with gorgeous people. But alas, unfortunately.
This is like profiling criminals.
Yeah, it's really not.
Profiling folks.
Most of forensic psychology has to do with a lot of paperwork. And the vast majority of people who are in the field do, court assessments for, child welfare, court assessments for, criminality and that kind of thing. So it's, yeah.
What is a PsyD? I think I'm saying this totally wrong.
So yeah, doctorates come as PhDs or PsyDs, and they have to do with the type of dissertation that you do. And so doctorates tend to are more engaged in high hands-on research, and PsyDs typically, not always, but typically are more engaged in reflective research. So you're looking at a lot of the extant research that's been done and then doing a massive meta study on it. So yeah, it's
got it.
There's really not a whole lot of difference. Really, it just depends on the program that you're in. So yeah,
they still call you doctor at the end, right?
You will call me Dr. D. I have enough debt that I deserve to be called that.
I will call you Big Dr. D. How about that? I like that so much better.
So there it is. Yeah.
Well, David, I would love to just kind of hang out with you and shoot the shit because I think we have a lot in common. But what are we here to really talk about tonight?
We are here, and we can we can actually take a look at the polls here real quick if we want. This was fun. So when was the last time you recognized you were wrong about something? Awesome about today. In fact, everybody who took this quiz and answered the last question should be saying yes to today. We'll get to that in a second. And what was
Wait, you're saying
yeah.
that every day we acknowledge that we were wrong about something? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we should.
Okay.
As a daily
right.
practice, we should be
Oh,
acknowledging
okay,
we're wrong about
got it.
something. When do feelings point us in the direction of being right? Sometimes. Now, it really wasn't a right answer here, other than, always. I'm glad 0 people picked that. That was awesome. And you can tell you're right if you're standing for the right thing by noting who is standing against you. Depends. Thank you for the plurality there. That was fun. And then, of course, the last one, as somebody noted in the chat about, did not like the answers, choices for number 4, absolutism is a helpful structure 4. So thank you, actually, Eric, for setting this up, because the correct answer really is none of the above. And it's absolutism that actually we are going to be talking about, in particular as it pertains to dialogue. And speaking of dialogue, I do not have a PowerPoint. I actually stopped doing that after the first time that I gave a presentation, because frankly, I love this. I love the give and take. Obviously, there are a lot of questions that'll be, saved for the end. And then, of course, I will be staying on for the, non-recorded kind of just chat afterwards, because it's a lot of meeting people and chatting. But really, if there is a question on occasion that I happen to see that's like, oh my gosh, that pertains exactly to what I'm going through right here, I might say something. Otherwise, Eric and Kara can, pipe in and go, wait a minute, let's clarify. So really, as much of a give and take as possible is just love it. So.
Perfect. David, let's start off by setting kind of the premise for this conversation. When you first approached me about this topic, I really got it immediately, and it was like, yes, this is this will be a fantastic one. This fits perfectly into RfRx. So just let's start off with the premise. Gray conversations. What do you kind of mean by that?
So what I mean by it is really that combination of a couple of the poll questions. No surprise, they were a setup for this discussion, and it has to do with, quite often upon leaving fundamentalism of any kind, most people here probably can remember that initial couple of years after having left religion, in which we were all extraordinarily pissed off and really wanting to stick it to whatever embodiment of the man we could, find. And as a consequence, likely, and I totally will include myself in this, were various levels of asshole. And it's really, it's an understandable reaction. But as well, what often ends up happening is we take the psychology of fundamentalism and bring it out of the religious structure and into the secular world and do one of two things. One, we will find a alternative. So everybody probably is aware of the quote unquote atheist who has fallen for any number of conspiracy theories, to belonging to various religious, other types of, or it's not religious, it's spiritual, things that fall prey to a lot of various levels of absurdity, who may find themselves drawn to extreme political groups, and so on, and then and then we'll see, oh my gosh, you're as much a proselytizer now for this new thing as you ever were. In fact, in some ways, almost more so now than you were as a believer. And part of what then, is seeing here is, one, this is, ultimately we'll see this as a natural, thing that occurs. that it is a tendency we all have that we can actively seek to limit. And then, of course, this gets into the great conversations piece, which is really approaching every conversation from the gray area of, guess what? Literally every moment of every day, we are all wrong about something in part or in whole. And if we haven't figured it out yet, don't worry, it's going to show up if we just ask enough questions. And that's true of ourselves and literally the next person in front of us. And one of the points actually that I'll say here and end on is that our dialogue and our dedication to study is, contrary to popular belief, not actually about finding truth. It really is about finding consistency. And it doesn't mean that truth doesn't matter. I'm not a relativist. It just means that when we're at the level of psychology, the level of what our biology is wanting us to do, it's really far less interested in truth, capital T, or finding the truth of the matter than it is about making sense within the world that has already been constructed. And which is why we got brought into religion in the first place and why we get sucked into other groups later on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like how you put that. It's almost like, coming out of religion, people reject the specific belief, but maybe don't reevaluate the way that they think about things in general, which leaves them susceptible to falling for something similar, just packaged differently. Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, and in fact, one of the criticisms that many of us likely have had of believers about whatever stripe is that many believe for reasons that are non-philosophical, non-reasoned. As a caveat, I will note that there are perfectly reasonable, rationales. I just don't think that they are probabilistically accurate. But there are some really good arguments for the various, for theism in a general sense. And I just don't think they ultimately work. But there's some really good ones out there. But generally, people don't fall into that camp. Generally, people aren't delving into the minutia of epistemic principles and everything else. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's, well, I was raised this way, or I just do. Or it's faith, which frankly is just an extension of ego. And it's you get into this, and then it's a little wonder then that they leave for often equally unsubstantiated reasons. And then later on, they find themselves falling into another thing, because really it was never principle led, it was circumstantial. And so if circumstances led you into one, circumstances are just going to lead you into another. And principles were never really conducted. And it's not a judgment per se. I know it sounds like that, and I apologize. It's not really that. It's a recognition that most of us, myself included, I'm sure, on any number of things, is interested in, again, that kind of continuity, establishing a consistent way of figuring out how the world works and then acting within it. And we're just not really all that interested in, one, figuring out how wrong we are quite often, because being wrong sucks. So let's just, call it out.
Yeah. It sounds a little bit like this is touching on some, maybe what's known as black and white thinking.
Yep.
Yeah. And but that is so addictive and so attractive to have just two clear options in life. I mean, why muddy the waters by making a spectrum of choices in between? I mean, come on, you're popping all of our bubbles here, because let's just keep it black and white.
I had somebody once who said that I was killing their bunny rabbits, which I thought was extraordinarily bloody and brutal as a metaphor, but wow, because I like bunnies. They give me candy on Easter, so but
that lucky rabbit's foot isn't too lucky for the rabbit, I guess.
It is not. Well, and it's, it's something, so I came across, so John Faithful Hammer, one M in Hammer on Facebook, just a fabulous person to follow. And he's got a lot of good stuff to, kind of get the thoughts churning at times. But he actually wrote similar to this topic, a week ago. I was like, perfect timing. But he quotes actually Aaron Haspel, philosopher. He said, one certainty is often exchanged for another. Doubt for certainty occasionally. Certainty for doubt almost never. And in reflecting on a friend of his, he reflected on, her name is scrawled in red ink next to this aphorism, my copy of everything. She was and probably still is a clear example of someone who goes through life exchanging one certainty for another. Someone who's extremely evangelical about whether, she happens to be into at the moment, veganism, going organic, skateboarding, new atheism, chemtrails, it's all these things. She would preach and proselytize incessantly, just as she probably preached and proselytized incessantly with her parents when she was a kid. Everyone had to be whatever she liked. What's more, highly prone to demonization. People who didn't share her enthusiasms were just boring. They were evil. Last, she had transcended Christian theology, but had not transcended Christian psychology. Witnessed the same pattern countless times, and it's led me to suspect that religion doesn't have much to do with believing or ceasing to believe in a metaphysical proposition like God. Religion shapes how you think and believe far more than what you think and believe. Getting rid of the idea of heaven doesn't necessarily rid us of the longing for a painless paradise. And
that's good.
Yeah. I would substitute painless paradise there for just plain certainty. We get rid of one and we want to replace it because, uncertainty sucks.
I could see that in myself too. Coming out of religion, I got excited about a lot of other different belief systems, and even a lot of other things. Like even in that little blurb you read, talked about veganism, or not like that's bad or anything, but the way she was presenting it to other folks and the kind of the way she went about it was very similar to how she evangelicalized about her. It's more than about just religion, and is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, so actually when talking with all of you before this, it's fantastic that, Palmer's presentation last week on, the faults in our thinking was just like presciently set up for this week. And I wanted to steal actually one of his first slides a bit and note how it's like, the human brain evolved on the African savanna well enough to allow Homo sapiens to survive in an unforgiving environment. But the thinking organ, which evolved to forestall death until we could raise offspring, is far from perfect. And, he had a lot of other points. Highly recommend going through and listening to watching the whole thing, because it's fantastic. But from that, psychology, human psychology that stems from this, biological history, is really interested in two things. What he notes is perpetuating life through identifying resources based on, and here's the added point here, projected needs. And we can get into that a little more as much people want.
Oh, wow. You're not even saying needs. You're saying like almost what I think I need type of.
Yep.
All right, wow.
Which is itself based on previous experience. So if you want to use a big word, anybody can look it up. It's fantastic. But it's actually, the theory is referred to as allostasis, which is slightly different than homeostasis, which is, but that's really what this is the idea that our bodies and therefore the minds that stem from it are looking at needs from a position of projection rather than equilibrium. And in fact, one of my favorite examples about this is caffeine, which we all know and love, is about the only existence of which makes me think that a benign being actually does exist. But caffeine, we take our cup of coffee in the morning, we take our energy drink, and how fast do we feel the hit? Like, how fast do we feel, that we're, energized and feeling more alert and so on? A few seconds, a minute?
Yeah, it seems like a lot faster than it biologically should be.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, it doesn't even hit your system for 9 minutes on average. It's not even fully metabolized on average for 40 minutes. So the whole like half an hour of feeling buzzed, that we're in the immediacy effect that we're experiencing, has everything to do with the body knowing, in the past when I tasted this, I know that I'm about to get inundated by this fabulous chemical. Therefore, I know that I'm going to have enough energy. Therefore, I can expend it now, knowing that it's going to be, replenished later. I mean, this is fundamentally about addiction, which is a whole other topic. But that's really what it is. I mean, it's our bodies knowing that we can spend it now because what I'm getting later is going to fill this back up. And that's really what we're doing pretty much almost all the time, really, is figuring out, if I do A, it will give me B because I know it'll help me address C in the future. And all of that, again, is based on our previous experience, which goes into a whole host of things, from everything from childhood to trauma to, living in various horrible circumstances or not. I mean, because everybody's doing it. It's just depending on, what our assessment is.
Just a heads up, we will be having an RfRx in November on addiction, bringing back Dr. Andy Thompson to talk about like the evolutionary pathways and such of addiction too. So I think that it'll be nice to kind of maybe have a play with us of these type of videos all together. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Oh, that'd be all right. I'll have to look ahead of that and make sure I'm free. So the second thing that psychology does based on evolutionary biology is that it builds and maintains a structure that makes experience felt as consistent and selects the resources for their importance. And we refer to this as identities. And
do that again. Do that again.
So it builds and maintains a structure that makes experience felt as one consistent and selects those resources from point one for their importance. And this is what we refer to as identity. So for instance, seeing a comment about might be a little confusing. So let me, try to be clear here. So imagine for a moment that you're trying to figure out what you need for you're a kid, figuring out what you need for school for the day, for instance. Now, generally speaking, you're going to operate from multiple identities. You're going to operate from identity of a student. You're going to operate from the identity of a child of a particular parent, so family identity as well. And all of those things are going to set you up to determine, okay, what do I need for the day to make sure I can get through it? And that is going to do everything from determining, like, I need, crayons, depending on what level of school you're in, to,
high school,
to, notebooks,
college,
and cell phones, to what conversation do I need to have with my parents? Or what conversation am I not having with my parents, depending on what home life you might have? And what do I then need to do for myself as having an identity of a child who is latchkey or doesn't have a stable home? What do I need to do in order to set myself up through this identity of being a child or an adolescent or whatever, to set myself up for the rest of this day? So, and we do this all the time, and it would change based on context. So we for instance, we enter into, we go to school, but then we enter in later on. We're about to go into, say, sports practice if we're on a sports team, for instance. Suddenly, we need different resources. We're going to talk different. We're going to approach people differently. We're literally going to act differently on the court or on the field than what we did during class. Why? Because the identity that we're filtering our resources through has changed.
I loved trash talking on the soccer field. This does kind of sound like planning, though, and you're kind of breaking down planning a little bit, like we're projecting ourselves, our future self, and like what do we need to ensure that what do we need to have to ensure that we accomplish what we're trying to get after.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay.
And so here's the rub, though. How often have any of us thought we were prepared for something and then got into it and went, oh shit. Like, there was a pop quiz perhaps, or...
Dude, I did it at the beginning of this RfRx thing. Gayle was like, Eric, you need to record. Eric, mute your phone. Like, oh crap, I thought I was prepared. I did it at the very beginning of this RfRx.
And so, and then it happens to varying degrees all the time. I mean, we're not perfect predictors. We can't be. Reality's too big for any single brain to figure out. And so what happens is depending on how bad our predictions are, will depend on the degree of anxiety we have, which will then get into, some people might be following here, wanting to figure out how to make things consistent next time. How do we do this generally? Through making things as simple and basic as possible. Enter absolutism through various, ideologies of religion, politics, and so on, because I don't need to figure out, say, the nuances of epidemiology and social contagion and all of these other things, because I just know that my group said vaccines are a tool of the government to control us. Or, I don't need to have a vast, notion of geology and epistemology and physics. I know that the Earth is 6,000 years old because the identity of a, young Earth creationist, this makes everything simple for me. This is easy. I can remove everything that's not relevant and focus on the things that allow me to continue making sense of the world.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. This is like going back to those heuristics that Rob was talking about last week. It kind of reminds me of that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where they're asking Data, like, how as a computer or an android could you possibly understand what friendship is? And he says, well, I've grown accustomed to your sensory inputs.
Yep. In fact, actually, I love that because to a degree, he's really not wrong. I mean, it's one of those things where, you get into attachment research and, you get into, certain couples who, or even just good friends, on the couple spectrum kind of thing. It's like they can eventually finish each other's sentences and know to a degree like what the other person's feeling or whatever before they even open their mouth. Like they just enter the room and they're like, dude, rough day. Yeah, it sucked. And they haven't even said anything. It's just because they have gathered enough previous, to quote Data, sensory data, to be able to say, well, wait a minute, in the past, laying on the couch, oh my God, doing this kind of thing was a sign that the day was terrible. And so, it allows us to do that. I mean, if anything, good friendships are this is totally not romantic. It just allowing us a combination of time and awareness of collecting data points to go, wow, I can predict you well enough to be able to, converse with you in a more honest and in full way. So we're not spending as much time going, no, that wasn't right. Here's what I was actually thinking. Instead, we can just skip all that and go right to, oh, thank you for seeing me.
So data was onto something.
He was a little bit, yeah.
So these
Not
shortcuts
entirely.
are in a sense to save processing time again. Like, okay, I learned this, so here's a shortcut to never have that happen again. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's something that's based in reality. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. Is that what I'm hearing? Like, there's flaws inherent in some of these shortcuts, or all of them?
All of them. Yeah. I mean, Plummer went through it, but, in fact, for that matter, I've talked about it in a previous one. But, the important thing here is because one, I don't want to necessarily rehash previous RFR talks. So I'm seeing that comment. But there is a point here where some of this is about deliberately building on previous knowledge and seeing how it can help us figure out more things and spread this out. So instead of having all of these disparate points of information, we're actually using this to go, okay, wait a minute, maybe I can connect A to B, or RFR talk 1 to RFR talk 2, and and start coming up with these bigger pictures, because the topic for today has been touched on tangentially in other things. And as a consequence, and to be perfectly honest, I did not think I was actually going to go here. So this is kind of funny. But it really is that a recognition that we can piece a lot of this kind of collective knowledge together, and by doing so allow us to create a bigger whole than just the sum of the parts. We can, it's kind of like we can split together, say, and describe a hurricane by a speed of wind and water, droplets and in damage and so on. But nobody is going to take you seriously who has lived through a hurricane that goes, I understand what a hurricane is because I can give you these data points. Nobody's going to take you seriously. They're going to be like, move to Florida, buddy, and we'll let you know exactly what this is really about. And yet at the same time, the person isn't wrong. It's just incomplete at a certain level of, to use a very big phrase these days, lived experience. There is a level at which, understanding does include experience, so long as we take stock of the fact that it is made up of a lot of different data points, behind us. And it's those data points that we have to be very careful about how we're putting them together.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like, if you're only relying on that quantitative data-driven approach, you're missing a lot of the qualia, or the actual qualitative experience of people that you can't take away from, an average, and here's the standard deviation and the mean of these points. Yep.
And in fact, that's, if anybody taking a look at media reports of a lot of things, is that for one, the human brain is really, 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 really terrible at big numbers. We don't, that's why we have math. That's why we created computers in order to take over the things that we're terrible at least initially. Now we do it because we wanted to take over everything else. But initially it was created in order to take over the things we're terrible at. And and very bad at probability, yes. And so, as a consequence, we will see things that are empathically relevant but are empirically false. So for instance, the stats, yeah, everybody swears stats needs to be a required class in like sophomore year of high school. Like you are not allowed to pass high school without stats. And it is perfectly capable of studying stats without all the rest of the math. You can figure this out. Anyway, plug for stats. But part of what's going on here is, the heuristics that were referred to as before, confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, these things aren't bad in and of themselves. They are inherent qualities of our brains. They're inherent qualities of which we are parsing data around because we simply cannot grasp the totality of reality at any given moment. And so as a consequence, we have to pick and choose. Well, how do we pick and choose? And that's where we get back to identities. And that's where we get back to, group cohesion. This is where we get back to, authority. The whole thing of argument from authority can be bad, can also be good, because not all of us are capable of becoming experts on every field out there. So eventually we have to just go, I have these principles and this person tends to generally follow it. So I'm going to trust this person. Like, here it is. We have to do it. Confirmation bias is legitimate to the degree that allows us to move forward. But in order to make sure that we don't fall down the rabbit holes, we have to be aware of that's what's happening. So that's kind of where we're currently at.
And it sounds like these are done unconsciously for the most part, like, and we're not even aware of which set of heuristics we have. And it sounds like that's the case. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
And as a consequence, we have these, social truths that are helpful in that process of consistency and making things simple, but they're utterly terrible in, understanding and acknowledging nuance and having good, what is referred to as generative dialogue. I love this phrase. And because rather than just regular dialogue, generative dialogue has to do with essentially the process of steel manning. So I know, straw manning often comes up. Well, steel manning is a kind of rejoinder to that. I forget who coined it. Maybe somebody will know in the chat. I forget. But somebody coined the term, and it may have been Dennett, Dawkins, I forget. But it was, it came out of maybe Bogosian, for all I know. But it came out of the idea of being able to articulate an alternative perspective in such a way that the other person goes, man, yeah, that is exactly it. That is better than I could have said it. And then, of course, you come back and go, yeah, and I don't agree with it. So rather than picking the lowest hanging fruit, for instance, of any particular religion, instead we go for the most difficult, well thought out positions and go, if I can understand that and figure out why it's false, then everything else, falls, from it. And so part of these stories is, for instance, emotion is divorced from reason. In fact, the corollary to that would be, in order to make good decisions, we need to remove emotion from the equation. I'm actually still hearing therapists of all people say that, which just irks me to no end. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But of course, the reality being is that there is no no separation between the two. Read Kahneman. Or part of it is emotion is a window to your true self. You often will hear this. You'll actually often hear this in variations of I'm not being a jerk, I'm just being real. or people can't handle the truths that I'm slinging, kind of thing. I mean, it's just like, it's this whole thing of like, no, you're not being emotionally open. You're just using it as an excuse to say whatever you want. This is not really getting us to the true you. This is a, this is a tactic really more than anything else. And yes, from the comment, DBT does teach both. DBT and acceptance commitment therapy. I'll do a plug for both.
You'll have to define or tell us what DBT is, because
sorry. So DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay.
Marcia Linehan out of University of Washington. I do believe she's still teaching there. Teaching, and I think probably more researching these days than teaching. Though I could be wrong about that. But I believe she's still based out of there, and a lot of it has to do with that tension between emotion and reason, and really understanding how this works. Yep. Okay. And which is also why I tend not to fall completely into it. It's a whole other thing. Acceptance commitment therapy, Stephen Hayes and others who basically the idea being that fundamentally psychopathology and various difficulties in life are due to avoidance of discomfort and uncertainty, and the habits that we create are often then about further and further isolating us from greater and greater pieces of reality. And as a consequence, we will then exhibit, avoidance of anxiety, avoidance of depression as feeling states. But as a consequence, we tend to exacerbate them through the habits of avoidance. And I'm really simplifying. And part of the process then is accepting that this too is part of life. If anybody studied Buddhism, they're seeing some overlapping here. So highly recommend. Yeah, DMT. And so, a lot of it is, really figuring out that this too will pass, that our thoughts and our emotions are not necessarily intrinsically tied to us. We can literally have thoughts and emotions all day long and still go, move along. I'm more than this. And as a quick point, we actually know this at a certain level when we pause and reflect on just how many thoughts we have throughout the day that we don't act on. Mm-hmm. I mean, which is a good thing, because most of us would be in jail to varying degrees. So, we know at a almost intuitive level that our thoughts are not synonymous with us. We can distance ourselves and go, I'm not going to follow this one. I'm going to follow this one. And so part of what's going on then is, learning to do that in a more coherent and consistent and broader way, so that we can just go, yeah, okay, thanks for showing up, moving along, I'm going to come up to the next one, kind of thing. So
thank you.
Yeah. If anybody didn't catch that, huge ACT therapist, can be across another presentation. But anyway, one of the other false stories is that I'm unique in the way of, in sense, being separate from others. I'm so unique that you cannot say take statistics or other ways of looking at humanity in general and understanding me. I'm just me. Wrong. In fact, these really have to be one of the two biggest falsehoods that people believe, is that we're all very, very unique to the point of not being understood by others. And two, here's the last one, decisions that I make are mine alone, because I am a fully independent person who gets to choose what variables affect me. No, you don't. Sorry to burst that bubble, but we really don't. Yes. And so I know, shocker.
David,
we're biological
I'm in this picture
creatures.
and I'm feeling attacked here.
Yeah, it's really, I love anybody who what was it? One of the latest things was every time the election season comes up and you inevitably have, the amount of money that is being spent on ads and so on. And, you always have the debate that goes on like, I'm not affected by these ads. And then of course, 5 minutes later, they're literally quoting from it as if it was their own independent thought. And I mean, it's really, this is what we do. Advertising wouldn't be such a great thing if it wasn't useful to the degree that it is. And it's perfectly fine. It's social media being what it is. And so in all of this, of course, this is stemming from, again, coming back to, we want a world to be consistent. We want things to make sense. And as a consequence, we develop ways of looking that allow us then to join with others that then help make the world make more sense. Because what makes more sense? Being surrounded by alternative perspectives, or being surrounded by people who are saying, you know what, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you know what? When I had that experience, I understood you completely, and I had the same thing happen to me. I mean, this is why we do it. I mean,
so being in an echo chamber feels good.
I mean, for that matter, just to point the finger back at ourselves, why are we here in this presentation? Why are we here with RfR? Because it feels good to be surrounded by people who come out of experiences going, yeah, that sucked. And being able to reminisce and, share resources and, feel that sense of, you know what, yeah, I was right to leave. I was right to point to how awful this thinking was. So obviously I'm here. I agree with all of this, but there it is. I mean, that's where, if anything, recognizing that, and this is a common refrain that I come back to, is that recognizing this should then, coming back to that great conversations, should allow us to, when conversing with anybody else, note that we're all really wanting to create a boat that makes sense, that will, provide this, the means of moving through life. And the other person ahead of us or in front of us or beside us has created a different one. And we can start with that commonality and go from there, rather than, I don't like your boat, to possibly bury that metaphor. But yeah.
So we need a bigger boat that can accommodate more people.
We do get a bigger boat. In fact, that's where, kind of, but not an arc. That's awesome. And that's where we get to paying attention a bit to the time. That's where we get into, part of how we deal with these tendencies that we have is noting, if we're prone to creating what effectively are smaller boats, because the smaller it is, the more coherent it seems, and the more consistent the voices are that we hear, then part of combating this or dealing with it is to, one, possibly leave the small one we're on, or, spend some time in other ones, or, work at building a bigger one so that we are engaged in that constant practice of, I don't know. Just being able to say that phrase, it's one of the most powerful, was it, I think, Annika Harris, is big on saying that. I know, Dawkins, said it, many others, it's like one of the most powerful things to say for one's freedom is to be able to sit there and go, I don't know, and be okay with that.
And it's kind of the way you're kind of describing it, like if you are a part of a small group, and then you leave that group temporarily and join a larger group. Let's say a kid in church going off to college in either another state. I can kind of see how well that fits into what you're describing here. Like all of a sudden you're out of that echo chamber and you're exposed to so many more different ideas and ways of doing things than you would ever have been exposed to in a small group of like-minded folks.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, it's a practice that I try, and it comes and goes in waves of engaging with, but deliberately engaging with alternative perspectives. Picking up a book or an article from somebody that I know I am not going to agree with, and doing so from the perspective of, man, I am going to find something in here that I actually do agree with, because it is, I try to never say never about anything, but it's pretty darn rare to encounter anybody or any position that is wrong about every last minute point that they're making. I mean, it's highly unlikely. And so part of then figuring out is going, why, one, beginning from the consistency model of knowing here's somebody else in front of me, myself included, who is wanting to make sense of the world. And, here, and this is their path of doing it. So we can start from that common, humanity perspective, and then go, and what are they wanting to address? What are they, wanting to see done and change in the world that allows them to, feel better about it? Even the, flat out full crazy Pizzagate, conspiracy mongers. I mean, even if you have to go to the point of, well, they're right about the fact that there was pizza. I mean, even if you have to go all the way down to, food exists, it's often not just that, but still, they're wanting to, they're piecing things together and wanting to make sense of things. And sometimes it's making sense in the same way as clouds in the sky are not actually chickens and cows and other shapes. They're just clouds, but we sure as hell saw it. Or Jesus on toast. No, it's just variations of, browning. It's just, sometimes it's just that, but it's still then coming back to, wow, I really like toast. Or, aren't those clouds amazing? It's incredible that we can create these, images out of them. And maybe we can talk about, that process instead of necessarily the conclusions that we've gotten to.
Kind of what you're describing describes the path that I took from believing in supernatural into where I am now as this is just us. I'm an atheist now. Like, I was hardcore religion, and when I lost that and left that, went to conspiracy theories, and those started to totally make sense. And then for whatever reason, getting outside of my echo chamber and listening to some other folks, and they started to make more sense, and I was able to get out of the conspiracy type of thinking and into a more skeptical view of the world. Not cynical, skeptical.
What was it? Skeptical is just a cynic that hasn't lived long enough. But I'm not sure who said it. I may have just made it up, but I'm not sure.
We'll quote it next week, and we'll attribute
we'll
it to
quote
you.
it next week, and then it'll be priceless.
That's that's gonna be the TikTok clip right there.
Oh my gosh. Well, and in fact, actually, that process was mine as well. It was, I'd been raised with apologetical literature, evidence that demands a verdict, Norman Geisler, it's just like all of these people. So what I was being told was, here is what other people are thinking. And you don't have to go to the source. Just trust me. I will let you know what the other side is thinking. And eventually it was, maybe I should spend a little time actually reading some of these other, perspectives. And it was all downhill from there. It's just because you start going, well, wait a minute, that's not what they're saying. And what they're saying is so obvious. Why, or at least, when you read it, like, why is this not being seen this way? And either one, it's deliberately false, or two, and sometimes it is, but often I tend to lean towards the ideological structure was not allowing the person to view it accurately. Mm-hmm. And that's when we get back to identities again. It becomes increasingly difficult to see other people in their wholeness, in their authenticity, when we're deliberately seeing them through the eyes of a particular label, particularly when that is narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's both in projecting and our own processing. And we can't necessarily get out of it. So, a few of the things to move through it is that bigger boat thing. It's deliberately diffusing or broadening out how we see ourselves. I am not just, a male. I'm not just, a 40-something-year-old. I'm not just a son. I'm not just an atheist. In fact, often I don't even use the term anymore. I'm not just, whatever you want to do it, I'm all of these things and a whole bunch of others that I probably haven't even come up with yet. It's all of those things. And how do they all work together? And sometimes they might even contradict one another. Maybe they don't like one another. It's like, maybe this doesn't work. If I were to act purely on this, how would it get in the way of this other thing that I want? Now we get into, I want to act, I'm fiercely independent. I want to have my own thinking, but I'm really drawn to this, way of thinking, and I'm really drawn to these people over here. Shoot, maybe I do need to kind of figure out how this works together, kind of thing. So, it's having that deliberate process of kind of going, right, I am more than any one thing. And then engaging in all of those multiple perspectives, both the ones that we can take, but then the ones that are being shown to us. And no, this doesn't mean watching Fox News 8 hours a day, talk about low-hanging fruit. Actually engaging with, well thought out individuals who are not on Breitbart. Oh my gosh. Or others that may be on the, in fact, one way that I've looked at is looking at people who refer to themselves with one label that I generally don't agree with, but other people with the same label hate them. Fantastic way of going, wow, that's somebody I might be able to pay attention, to. It's in fact one conservative, and I am not, but one conservative that I actually love reading is Tom Holmes. I don't agree. If I remember right, he's, I think, a Catholic, and goes through it, and I'm like, I don't agree. I don't think this is legit. But man, do a lot of conservatives hate him. In fact, George Will from comments, was it Francis Fukuyama? Very much religious adherent, But man, he's got some really interesting things to say about, say, identity from the book of that title. You know, it's like you start looking for the people that are still holding on to a particular way of seeing themselves, but the general audience really doesn't like them. And you're going, okay, so they're still trying to figure this stuff out. And so the person's name was Tom Holmes. He wrote a book about the war against experts. Is what I don't think that was the title. I'll have to look it up. But he really is. He's got a recent one on about how how we've exalted individual experience is actually undermining democracy. Is basically his premise. So we've gotten so used to screaming about the one person that gets us all riled up that we're forgetting that we're actually in a country together and need to actually dialogue. So yeah, Chris Wallace is another one.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like you're saying that people will get so stuck in such a narrow mindset or paradigm almost that it distorts their ability to see what other people are even saying. And like, okay, to belabor the boat metaphor even further, possibly past its utility.
We've sunk that boat.
This boat metaphor is rudderly just crazy.
Rudderly
ridiculous.
ridiculous. Yeah. So if we get on a big enough boat, then we're able to expand our paradigm to the point that we realize sharks aren't even actually dangerous predators, but species that need conservation, and we can coexist with them.
Yeah. I mean, we might actually recognize that hippos kill more people than sharks do in a year. But you're not going to find Hippo Week on the Nature Channel. Yeah, no. Yeah.
I would watch that every year. Hippo Week. Oh my gosh.
Could it be Hungry Hippo Week?
Man, I love that game as a kid.
That's great.
Before we go completely off tangent.
I know we were totally
Sorry, that was my fault.
It's okay.
So it sounds like we nowadays our echo chambers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller until almost it's just we're left alone, or there's just maybe a handful of people that kind of just think really similar to us, and we're encouraged to be around them. But it's just incredibly small and a shit ton of these tiny groups.
Well, and in fact, actually, I wrote a blog entry a while ago about the the technological expansion of ego. Is basically this ability for us to find chat groups that I grew up in the space of Tom and MySpace, but these smaller and smaller groups that you could just create ad hoc. And make sure that the only people that were allowed in were the people that were still going to say yes. And, there's the old thing about, the sweetest thing we like hearing is the sound of our name, kind of thing. And honestly, I would expand that to, we love hearing affirmations. I mean, this is
David,
why.
You're absolutely right. I love that you're saying this.
Thank you, Eric. And I mean, this is why they're so it's why they're so helpful. I'm not saying affirmations are terrible.
Right.
It's just that when they're used in a particular way, and that's all that we're experiencing going forward, it's a problem. Was it Barbara Ehrenreich who went was it the myth of positive, or was it how positive thinking has ruined America? Basically, it's not the title of the book, but it's similar. Fantastic book. Highly recommend if anybody wants to read the history of how the kind of positive thinking movement and the name it, claim it, philosophy, all of that. from the early 40s onward. It's just great to see how it permeates so much of American culture. It's astounding. But really, the whole thing of I need to be right. I need to surround myself with people who are also saying I'm right. To the extension of don't share with me books or contrary opinions because that's messing with my equilibrium here, and that's a problem. It's like, no. Contrary to the coddling, it is a good thing to feel little. Now I want to go back to the boat metaphor. But
I'm getting the sinking feeling that you're going to do it anyways.
Yeah. And to end, like I said, from what I said at the very beginning, all of this is to recognize that what we're fundamentally doing at at the psychological level is that we're not striving for truth. That's an aspiration. We can totally, we have to actively, do the science, to quote, totally going to quote Ayn Rand. Rationality is a practice. It's something that is almost a gym activity. It's something that we have. It's a muscle that we have to actively engage with because our natural proclivity is to go the path of least resistance. And that was not a direct quote. But as a recognition that our innate striving is not for truth. It's how does this contribute to the consistent story I have of how the world works, period. And and if as soon as we start really living every moment from recognizing how this works, we can really start being able to sit back and go, or maybe I won't get sucked into this as much, or maybe I won't, to go all the way back to, the original story, basically just, find a new form of salvation to proselytize. Instead, I can take a look around and enjoy the fact that there are so many different ways of seeing the world.
I feel that it's comfortable kind of living with these shortcuts, and it's difficult to go outside of it because it's scary.
And you wouldn't want to rock the boat.
Oh my God. Oh, you guys better stop this or else.
we're going to keep going as long as you let us.
But what assurances could we have that it's better on the other side? I don't know, that maybe assurances isn't the right word, but why would we kind of want to step out of this and be okay with the not the black and white life anymore?
So the nice thing here is that uncertainty and multiple perspectives,
yes, that's it.
Allows us
it.
flexibility. I mean, it's when we're faced with a difficult situation, the last thing that we actually want is only one way of dealing with it. This is the old, like, if the only tool you have is a hammer, kind of thing. It's like,
yeah,
the opposite side of the coin, or however you want to put it, like the uncertainty breeds flexibility because it's a reminder that there are other ways of being, thinking, and reacting. And even if we disagree, like we can wholeheartedly disagree with how somebody else handled it. But if we take the time to understand why they did it, what they were trying to achieve, it is going to inevitably spark a way of, and this is just how brains work. We are constantly learning all the time.
yeah.
And the more information we take in, the more alternatives we take time to kind of go, okay, the more information the brain is able to create new ways of putting the data points together and forming new relationships, which then allows us to have new emotional experiences and new ways of talking with one another, which then allows us to create everything from skyscrapers to pyramids to the iPhone.
I am kind of relating this to my own construction background, and I'm thinking like, if I had kept doing the same thing I did when I first started out, I'd be a shitty contractor. But over the years, I've learned new tricks of the trade. I've learned new methods of how to do things, and I've gained a lot of cool tools that enabled me to do even more and more variety of things I couldn't have even imagined when I first started off. So I can see that now. Yeah. And I made a ton of mistakes along the way too, and learned from those mistakes in my own methodology, my own thinking, and became better for it too. Man,
Absolutely.
It's that's cool. Okay, I like the flip side of the coin, because the first reaction is fear. Stepping outside the comfort zone, and it's fear, and I love seeing the other side of the coin.
Yeah, and that's, and in one sense, I love fear, because fear is a recognition that the world isn't operating the way that we want or expect it. I mean, yes, The Gift of Fear, fantastic book. Also, The Science of Fear is a great way of, you read both of those, fantastic. Yeah. In fact, Science of Fear has one of my best, rather favorite examples of inflexibility in thinking. And in that, they after the 9/11 attacks, they crunched the numbers as to, because we can pretty much predict within, a certain percentage how many people per year are going to die, for instance, in car wrecks and so on. Or
by coconuts or sharks or hippos.
Yeah, exactly. And so they crunched the numbers as to how many people, because so many people avoided planes in the year after 9/11, and how many more people then died that next year in car accidents that otherwise would not have died had they, gone on planes. Because in order to hit the same number of aggregate numbers of car wrecks, a plane would have to be falling from the sky every 5 minutes. I mean, it's insane how many plane crashes would actually have to occur to get the same ratio of numbers of what occurs then in cars. And they basically, so the first intro chapter is 5,236 or something like that. I forget the exact numbers, but it's thousands. And it's literally that number of people extra who died in the year after 9/11, because the number went right back down to the norm a year later, and when people went back to doing traveling by planes. And it's here we have, just literally thousands of people who, due to various heuristics and ways of, looking at things, didn't need to, but did. And as a consequence, died. One of the points that it missed there is that moving away from absolutism, which I want to come back to for a moment, because it could be construed that going, well, if you continue to go down this path of finding absolutist things, post-religion, you're a bad person. That's not what I'm saying. It's really a recognition that this is a tendency that we have, and it's reasonable to a degree, because we want things to make sense, and nothing makes more easy, quick sense than a fundamentalist ideology and some equivalency. And one of the ways of moving away from that really is a fuller appreciation, actually, of morality. of ethics. And there's one of the books I recommend over and over and over again. I think I actually put it in resources here is Morality for Humans, Ethical Understanding from the Perspective of Cognitive Science by Mark Johnson. But he notes how moral deliberation at its best is a process of reconstructing our experience in a way that resolves the morally problematic situation that is currently confronting us. Such a process involves the only reasonable notion of transcendence available to humans, namely the ability to move beyond our current habits of thought and action to creatively remake some aspect of ourselves and our world. There is nothing about such a process that takes us out of our skins, as if we were somehow little gods capable of generating moral absolutes. Instead, imaginative moral deliberation is embedded, embodied, and enacted within our changing, malleable experience. And it's really, the title of that fear book was The Science of Fear by Daniel Gardner, Gardner. But so Johnson's thing here, really, the book is a massive argument against absolutist morality, against just fundamentalism as a way of looking at relationships and our way of interacting with one another, which is another way of saying ethics. Really, I mean, ethics really is just how we interact with one another. And his whole thing is that while fundamentalism and absolutism is a seemingly innate tendency for us, it actually denies fundamental parts of who we are as biological, embodied creatures. That it denies the fact that every moment of every day we are going through change. And an ethic that doesn't allow for a contextual understanding, that doesn't allow for added information, is an ethic that will lead only to stagnation and really ultimately violence. Because when you're faced with, reality doesn't care. Reality doesn't care what we think. It's going to keep doing its thing. And so when faced with the inevitability of us being wrong, we only have a couple of options. One is to avoid, put our heads in the sand of some kind, or two, get extraordinarily violent and try to force some part of the world to obey our vision of it. And that is just highly unhelpful, to be perfectly honest. It's
Wow.
not.
I hadn't tied violence to this type of conversation or thinking before. And reality, like what's been going on just amongst humans these last few years, has somewhat snapped into focus now that you've made that connection.
Mm-hmm. No, I would put, so much of political discourse, so much of what's going on throughout is really a variation on the world must and only must look this particular way through the lens of a particular, identity, and therefore anything that doesn't fit must be either denied or destroyed. And so you get into, and this is where we get into, well, you did one thing wrong back 10 years ago, and now therefore I must destroy everything. Actually I caught flack years ago for liking a Dilbert cartoon. It was a comic strip, and because the guy who creates Dilbert is, to put it lightly, a huge conspiracy mongering Trump fan, and But I had long loved his, the Dilbert cartoons before that ever really came to light. And certainly I didn't know until it was like, oh, right, this guy. Oh, yeah, no, I really disagree fundamentally with this. And yet at the same time, I can fully appreciate the absolute hilarity of the mockery of the office, environment, that particularly at the time that I was part of. And it was really that, I mean, this was years ago and it's still very clear because it's for me, a crystal, example of a person can be utterly awful and wrong in one area and still provide an amazing contribution in another. And the ability to be able to hold those in tension is, I think, and perhaps I'm being Pollyannish, but being able to hold that tension really is fundamental to good dialogue, which is fundamental to good democracy, which is fundamental then to creating a world in which we can all have a whole lot of various expressions of who we are and have it be okay. Like ultimately it's really what we want.
The thing that triggered for me when you said the word destroyed, like it has to be like assimilate or destroy. The thing that immediately came up for me was like hell seems to be the solution to the people who don't agree with the group that I'm in. And so if I can send everyone else who doesn't agree with me to a place where they can be destroyed and apart from my group, that'll be good. So that's cool. Another connection, I guess. That thanks.
No, that's in fact, I mean, what was it? I forget the philosopher, but he was talking about how, when faced with the poor arguments for God's existence, and he's going, well, sir, you're going to go to hell. And he's like, I would rather go to and be damned for questioning than be celebrated for not. And any deity worth worshiping is going to be the one that said, wow, you didn't agree with me, but you tried and you asked and you delved into as many questions as possible. Whew, that's great. The deity that says, I would much rather your acquiescence than your mind is not one worth following. And I'm completely butchering any number probably of quotes here, but that's fundamentally really what it comes down to. And anybody who follows in that, who says, I would rather your allegiance, I would rather your affirmation, I would rather your agreement than your thoughtful questioning, is not somebody that I really am going to spend too much time with. Certainly not in the sense of, following whatever they're doing. We might have a great conversation over beers.
Yeah, this was great. This was really fantastic. I'm grateful for the connections that were made and kind of like a deeper look into how I operate on a regular basis, and that provides, I can see this going to provide me some motivation to be okay with being wrong and to be okay with being questioned, and even that, and the whole fear is identifying how my expectations aren't being met or something like that. And these are some fantastic tools. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, in fact, so one point just from that, it's one of the things I work with a lot of clients on is that anytime you're having an emotional reaction, to first ask, what is the value that is being either supported or violated? Don't get stuck in, the behavior that's right in front of you. This isn't dismissing it. There's awful things. not that at all. But instead it's going, my emotional reaction is letting me know that something important here has been either supported. This is why I'm feeling, joy or any number of other things. Or something I really care about is being violated through a particular action. But what I need to do in order to assess this better, in order to figure out how I can react to this in a non-automatic way, is to get down to what is the value that is so important to me that it has triggered such a visceral response. And once we figure that out, once we take the time to go, oh, I really care about family. I really care about integrity. I really care about honesty. I care about, questioning and, social, community. That's why this thing over here is ticking me off so much. We can take the time to go, okay, well, how do I want to respond based on that? Okay. Rather than spending our time, often wasted attacking the action itself, because it's already been done. And, there's only so much we can do. Again, caveat, ignoring actions and not letting people get away with us. It's just that initial step of being able to reflect ourselves so we can gain that flexibility of being able to react in broader and broader ways so we can figure out new ways of being.
Yeah, I really like that. It's really kind of going back to that kind of fundamental principle of, dealing with people before positions. If you're actually going to resolve a conflict or a disagreement, it's exactly what you're saying. You're wasting your time going after, well, you did X and I think you should have done Y. Yeah, but why? What's the real value that's at stake here? That's really cool.
David, thank you so much. This was one whole of a discussion. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and drop the resource lists that he has provided, along with links to kind of check out those resources as well. Kara, do you have any thoughts or questions that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I guess, if I had any kind of closing questions, it would be, in your daily life, David, how do you kind of check in with yourself and make sure that you are following these principles and not getting stuck in an echo chamber, for example, or how do you make sure that you're getting into those other boats? Is there a way that you kind of catch yourself if you fall into these thinking traps?
So I will note that I fall into them. So this is not about like I've mastered this not at all. So that being said, I am reminded of, in fact, it's one of the books, but it's called Being Wrong: Adventures on the Margin of Error by Catherine Schultz. And she has this thing where she asks the question, what does it feel like to be wrong? Mm-hmm. And the answer is kind of like being right, because we feel right about identifying that we were wrong. It's really, so I take that and put it into practice of going like, anytime that I spend any length of time going, I'm feeling really right. Like I'm feeling like I haven't felt uncertain, or I haven't been kind of knocked back a little bit or unmoored. You have, anytime I've felt like that there's been something that wasn't questioned, I'm like, wait, I need to go find something here because I'm likely missing something. In fact, I'm sure of it. Like there's something that I missed, and now I need to figure out what it was. And so it really is that kind of constant reflective practice to get into the habit of, meditation honestly helps. And by meditation, I actually do mean more, the breathing, everything else is great. But I'm actually meaning more meditation is almost conscious reflection on what it means to be conscious and have that experience. So a bit more of a, from a neurological perspective, recognizing, for instance, that literally everything that pops up is a moment in consciousness. And so as such, then there is nothing that we're experiencing that isn't in it. And so going, well, wait a minute, if everything is, then both truth and falsity are. And how do I tell the difference if it's all experientially going along in the same, space? Well, then I need to learn how to separate from, the fact, the idea of thoughts are always accurate, that emotions are leading to a particular truth, that, that my mind is on the pursuit of truth. Again, that, coming back to that point, like my goal here is not at a fundamental level, is not about truth. It's about consistency. And so I need to remind myself and then go, okay, well then when was the last time that I felt off? When was the last time that I felt inconsistent? And then question it, see what's at the heart of it.
So you're basically always questioning. If you're at a point where you're feeling too confident, that's a signal that you might want to reevaluate, before you crash onto the rocks.
So it sounds like you've identified two extremes, two different points to identify where when you might be coming up against a heuristic, I guess, is either you're feeling too confident or you're starting to fear and get emotionally out of whack. Would that be a good, would that be good indicators that running up against a wall?
You are right. There is that anytime we're feeling where too calm, too safe, it is a sign that we probably are, missing something, or we haven't questioned enough. And at the same time, if we're feeling emotionally, disjointed and almost malignantly uncertain, there's also a point, to think that everything is going to be great is equally as ridiculous as everything is going to be awful. They're both the different manifestations of the same absolutist principle. And so, it's, the crazy positivist, the name it, claim it is just as unhelpful as the cynic who says everything is awful and everybody's out for number one. It's just not, neither position is true.
David, thank you so much for coming and talking.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Great.
Kara, do you have anything you wanted to add before we kind of move on?
Are you really sure you want to ask me that question, Eric?
I know, right? I really would like to disembark, but this just
we're gonna be tied up in knots all night.
God. Yeah. Well, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the conclusion. But before we do, is there anything you want to kind of wrap up with, or anything you haven't said? Just such a kooky.
No.
All right.
I think, yeah. That's awesome.
Well, folks, thank you so much for sticking through these horrible puns and fantastic dad jokes. I love them. But I know you may decide not to come back, but it's not always like this. We're going to have another one next week. And next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Next Monday, here in the US and the Western Hemisphere, we have an RfRx. It's titled The Amway of Cults, Bad Perms, and Other 1980s Atrocities with Rachel Roberts. And she actually has a master's in theology, and it's going to be an excellent discussion. So here's the description. During the decades when evangelicalism, that rolled right off the tongue, was coalescing with politics, a homegrown cult reached its zenith, a religious pyramid scheme that bilked people of their money, identity, and freedom quietly penetrated the southern United States. Rachel Roberts escaped the cult in the 1980s and fortunately outgrew both, just like her teenage bad perm. I'm really kind of looking forward to this. She's going to be describing a tiny little cult that happened and is no longer in existence, but we're going to get a lot of insight into what cults actually look like. As we mentioned at the beginning, all previous RfRx recordings are on our YouTube channel. We are finally caught up. I love it. And if you have any topical questions, more shitty and fantastic boat puns, or even death threats from coming out of this RfRx, please send them to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. I'm looking forward to my inbox now for the next few days. You can also take a look at our blog at medium.com/excommunications and our podcast. If you can't donate or volunteer, or even if you can and you feel a little more generous, what really helps us out here at Recovering from Religion is to interact with us and share and like and comment, blah, 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 all that fun stuff on social media. We've got a Facebook page, we've got a Twitter account, we've got Instagram, and we've got a TikTok. So I'm going to drop those links into the chat. Kara, this was all highlighted yellow, which means you were supposed to do that. I am so damn sorry. I just was thrown off by... you want to take the rest of the stuff?
No worries. I was just going to let you go with it because I know you run a tight ship here, Eric. Didn't want to interrupt you. But yeah, in addition to that, there's also the newsletter.
Boy.
Oh man, that y'all asked for it, you got it, in addition to all of the nautical puns that you didn't ask for, no one wanted. But there is the newsletter, and that's where you can see all of the news about exciting goings on at RFR and all of our recent resources that we've added, recent videos that have been published, and our blog posts as well. And I think Eric is dropping that in the chat as well. So definitely check that out. Sign up for that if you'd like to stay abreast of all of the latest topics and puns available. And I think we've finally reached the end of this situation. So Eric, are you ready to set up the final poll?
Yes, I am. All right. So we have a poll. I don't know if we want to launch this. This is our feedback poll, for crying out loud. But I'm going to go ahead and launch it. We'll see what happens. And while this poll is running, I'm going to bring up the captain of this whole RFR endeavor, Gayle Jordan. Gayle, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, matey. I'm fine. How are you? So lame. So everyone, I think it's time we drop anchor on this conversation. This has been absolutely delightful. You all have been good sports to listen to our silliness and to participate in it, and it's been awesome. David, what a remarkable presentation. That was fabulous. I learned something every time, and this was no exception. I love what you said, the tail end of it about zero in on the value, figure out the value, don't get waylaid by the minutia, because we get stuck in the minutia, and that's not what the issue is. It's the value. So so helpful. Thank you everyone for coming to attend. If it looks like I haven't slept in 3 nights, it's because I haven't slept in 3 nights. We just got back from the 2021 fall excursion. It was in the cool, beautiful mountains of North Carolina. We had a great number of folks join us there. We had a wonderful weekend. You have heard me describe it as a retreat with all the goodies and without any of the baddies, and it was indeed awesome. We had a beautiful afternoon thunderstorm. We had beautiful weather. We were in gorgeous cabins. We had fabulous sessions, delicious food. Everything about it was just phenomenal. Make plans now to come the next time. We had our debrief meeting yesterday and this afternoon, and we're already planning for next year. So make it a point to try to attend our fall excursion. I hope everyone will stick around for the hangout. That's the best time. That's the fun time. We stop the recording so you can relax and don't worry that any of your puns are going to be recorded and you can speak freely. Thank you again for coming. As always, punch the donate tab, punch the volunteer tab. You know the deal. You know the routine. We'd love to have you partner with us. Thank you again for coming. Thank you to our troll smashers, our hosts, and David, thank you again for a wonderful session.